In this lecture, you're going to learn how to work with CSV files in Python. In case you don't know, CSV stands for comma separated value, and it's like a simplified spreadsheet stored as a plain text file. So on the top, we import the CSV module. First, we need to open a file. So for this, we need to use the built-in open function. We cannot use the path class. So open, let's call this file data.csv. Now we want to open this in the write mode because we want to write data to it. This returns a file object. So when we are done, we should make sure to close it. Or as I told you before, a better approach is to use the with statement. So with open as file. Now we don't need to close the file. That is better. So this CSV module has a method for creating a CSV writer. We call this and pass our file object. So look at the first parameter here. It has to be a file object. That's why we cannot use the path class. So we pass the file object here, and this gives us a CSV writer. And with this, we can simply write tabular data to our CSV file. So writer.write row. Here we pass an array of values. So for the first row, I want to add the headings of this table of data. So let's say we're going to have 3 columns: transaction ID, product ID, and price. Then one more time, writer.write row. We pass an array of data. So let's say transaction ID is 1,000, product ID is 1, and price is $5. We can duplicate this, write another row with different data. Now let's save the changes and run this program. Okay. So here in our project folder, we have data.csv. As you can see, this is like a simplified spreadsheet. So we have a table of data. Each line represents a row, and our cells are separated using a comma. This is a very simple way to store data and transfer it from one machine to another. Now let me show you how to read a CSV file. So let's say we have a CSV file called data.csv. Now we should open this file in the read mode. So we don't want to supply this second argument. Next, instead of a CSV writer, we need a CSV reader. So let's call the reader method and rename this variable to reader. Now we can call the list function to get all the data in the CSV file and convert it to a list object. Let's take a look. So run the program. As you see, we get a list of lists. So each line in our CSV file is a list of objects. Note that the value of each cell is represented as a string, even if you're dealing with a number. So we have to manually convert these strings to integers, floats, and so on. We can also iterate over this reader object because it's iterable. So for row in reader, let's print row. Run the program. Now we don't see anything here. We only see the output of line 5, where we convert this reader to a list object. So what happened to these 2 lines? Well, this reader object has an index or a position that is initially set to the beginning of the file. When we convert this reader to a list, that position goes to the end of the file. So at that point, when we iterate over it, we are already at the end of the file. And that is why we cannot iterate this reader twice. So let me comment out line 5 and run the program one more time. There you go. Now we have 3 rows. Each row is an array of strings. So as you see, working with CSV files is pretty easy in Python. With these objects, we can do some interesting things. For example, let's say we have a directory of 100 or 1,000 CSV files. We can iterate this directory, open each CSV file, and remove the first row, which is the header row. Or perhaps we want to combine these CSV files into one file. We can easily do that here. Another interesting thing we can do is to summarize the value of these CSV files. Let's say we have 10 CSV files, and each CSV file represents the transactions for a given product. With only a few lines of code, we can read all these CSV files and calculate the sum of sales for each product, and then store the result in another CSV file. The possibilities are endless.